The governor of Maine and Donald Trump got into a little, a little boxing match with one another. Donald Trump issued a ban on trans girls from participating in girls' sports. Maine did not comply with this ban. The Trump administration, the USDA more specifically, then froze all funding to the state of Maine. The state of Maine then sued the USDA. Now, both of those have been dropped. Both of those cases. When Maine brought this case to the USDA, or when they brought this lawsuit to the USDA, they said that if you restore the funding, we will drop this lawsuit. And the USDA did just that. This is what happens when you are principled and when you stand on those principles. You prevail. The federal government cannot hide from public pressure. The federal government will cave on issues if there is the appropriate amount of backlash. But the appropriate amount of backlash cannot be levied if you have leaders, whether they be in the public or the private sector, who buckle to the whims of Donald Trump. The state of Maine refused to do that. And now they have a legal victory against the Trump administration. This article is courtesy of The Guardian. The Trump administration has agreed not to freeze funds to Maine schools, a win for a state that was targeted by the president over its support of transgender rights. In a settlement disclosed on Friday, the USDA said it would halt all efforts to withhold funds for a child nutrition program in Maine. Think about how fucked up that is. Simply because the leader of a state does not agree with your policy proposal, you are willing to withhold critical funding to a vulnerable group of people. It is despicable. It is gross. It is highly partisan, and it should not be allowed. This, to me, is an impeachable offense. I, as a public figure or as a public servant, would never think to withhold funding from a red state just because they didn't go along with my policy prescription. If red states opted out for Medicare for all, do you think that I would withhold funding for children to be able to eat? You are a sick, sinister, and twisted human being if you think that this is an appropriate response. The USDA had suspended those dollars after Maine officials said the state would not comply with Donald Trump's demands that trans girls be barred from participating in women's sports. I think in the aftermath of this, the governor of Maine came out and was like, there's literally one trans student in the entire school system. This is not a winning issue for Republicans. This is merely to make the most far-right lunatics feel like something is being done. I've been very vocal in speaking out against this issue as both someone who is supportive of trans rights and as someone who has participated in sports for the entirety of my life. The first point in this is that biological men, biological women, there is no inherent advantage that one has over the other that drastically alters their output in specific sports. When we think of non-contact sports, we think of women playing in trans women in basketball, trans women in fencing, which is already a co-ed sport, by the way. There is nothing that implies that a trans woman would automatically be better than a cis woman in a basketball game. It all comes down to how talented you are at that sport. Riley Gaines has managed to become a media darling off of being a fucking loser. She rose to prominence in conservative media because she got beat by Leah Thomas in a swim meet. She didn't get beat. They tied, and they tied for fifth fucking place. You're mad at the trans person when 4 cis women beat your ass. And it's because people like Riley Gaines who have this mentality are fucking losers. They're losers. They're spoiled little fucking brats who don't recognize the fact that there are people who can be better than them, or they can't grapple with the fact that, oh my God, I lost in this event. Maybe this is not my skill set. In February, when the president directly threatened to revoke funding from the state at a White House meeting with the governors, Janet Mills, Maine's Democratic governor, had responded, "We'll see you in court," in a widely shared exchange. Maine then sued the USDA last month to maintain its funding and agreed on Friday to drop its lawsuit in exchange for the restoration of funds. It's good to feel a victory like this, the governor said. "I stood in the White House, and when confronted by the president of the United States, I told him I'd see him in court. Well, we did that and we won." This is leadership. This is who I want at the front of the Democratic Party. Forget Chuck Schumer, forget Jerry Connolly, forget Hakeem Jeffries. These are the people who are actually standing up against Donald Trump and his implementation of fascism all across the country. The governor said the USDA had frozen funds for a program that helps feed 172,000 children in the state. The USDA did not immediately reply for comment. The settlement says the USDA and Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Agriculture, quote, "agree to refrain from freezing, terminating, or otherwise interfering with the state of Maine's access to the U.S. Department of Agriculture funds based on alleged violations of Title IX without first following all legally required procedures." The Trump administration had alleged Maine's policy of allowing transgender youth's participation in sports violated Title IX, the federal anti-discrimination law. Maine's attorneys argued that the child nutrition program received or was due to receive more than $1.8 million in funds for the current fiscal year. Prior year funds that were awarded but are currently inaccessible total more than $900,000, the lawsuit said. The complaint also said it was the complaint also said that the program was anticipating about $3 million that is typically awarded every July for summer meal program sponsor administration and meal reimbursement. A federal judge had ordered the Trump administration to unfreeze funds last month after finding that Maine was likely to succeed in its legal challenge. Aaron Frey, the Maine Attorney General, said in a statement on Friday, quote, "It's unfortunate that my office had to resort to federal court just to get the USDA to comply with the law and its own regulations, but we are pleased that the lawsuits has now been resolved and that Maine will continue to receive funds as directed by Congress to feed children and vulnerable adults." The settlement does not affect another ongoing lawsuit filed by the Trump administration against the Maine Department of Education over its policy for trans athletes. Mills said Friday she was confident that the state would prevail in that case. The governor, who has said the dispute was about defending states' rights, said these are bullying tactics. We will not tolerate them. Trans issues do not poll well among voters when they're asked to order what means the most to them. That is not to say that trans rights don't matter. That is to say, however, that people who live in the United States of America would rather the government focus on addressing the cost of living, for example, or fighting for higher minimum wage and a new healthcare system than restricting the rights of the dozens, because it's not that many, dozens, if it's even multiple dozens, of trans athletes in the high school system here in the United States of America. People just simply want to be able to live a comfortable and fulfilling life. Trans people existing does not have any bearing on these people. In fact, the majority of people who live in this country are agnostic towards trans people. Very much like how they became agnostic towards gay people. It doesn't matter what kinds of lives these people lead, as long as they are nice and respectful to their neighbors. People care more about their own economic standing than they do about trans people, which is why trying to strip trans people of their rights is a play that only works within the far right wing of the Republican Party. It is also incredibly inhumane when you consider that trans people are significantly more likely to kill themselves than any other group of people. It is morally reprehensible to target a marginalized community as fervently as the Trump administration has with trans people. Shout out to Janet Mills and to all of the Maine Democrats who stood on business and who stood for the right for for trans people in the state of Maine to not only exist but to participate in athletics.